They said it was justice, swift, decisive, necessary. But from the very beginning, the conviction didn't make sense, because Isaac Moreno was not the kind of man to be caught off guard. Yet the trial lasted only 3 days. The evidence lined up with eerie precision, and not a single person questioned how a rising entrepreneur with no prior record, no known enemies, and an airtight alibi somehow ended up convicted of orchestrating a mob hit on a man he'd never met. But it wasn't just that the story was unbelievable. It was that it was too believable, like it had been written before the crime even happened. The security footage that showed him entering the building was grainy but clear, except the timestamp glitched at the exact moment of the murder. The gun found in a dumpster a block from his office had his fingerprints, but not a single smudge from the person who supposedly shot it. And the key witness, a low-level mob courier named Frankie V, recited his testimony like a rehearsed script, voice steady, eyes cold, never once looking at Isaac, never once flinching under cross-examination, and despite every gut instinct screaming that something was wrong, the jury delivered a guilty verdict with robotic certainty, 25 to life, no parole. And just like that, Isaac Moreno, the same man who once inspired inner-city youth with free mentorships and bootstrapped himself from foster care to CEO, was locked inside a maximum security prison for a crime he didn't commit. But here's the part the mob never expected. They thought prison would break him, but Isaac wasn't built to break. He was built to endure. And as the walls closed in and the world moved on, he didn't fold into bitterness. He sharpened into purpose, because somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't just about him. This was about power, about sending a message to anyone who dared to rise too fast without permission. The kind of quiet warning the mob used to keep communities paralyzed in fear. But Isaac saw something else. He saw a war they started that they didn't know he was prepared to finish. And so he studied the guards, memorized routines, tracked contraband movement, made connections, not with gangs, but with minds. Former lawyers, whistleblowers, even a retired judge doing time for bribery. He became a student of the system, learning how it could be manipulated, where it cracked, and most importantly, who pulled the strings. And that's when the pieces began to fall into place. Frankie V, the star witness, had disappeared shortly after the trial, supposedly in witness protection, but Isaac found a thread. An anonymous prison librarian who recognized Frankie's voice from wiretap evidence in an unrelated racketeering case. And that voice, that testimony, wasn't just coached. It was created, spliced together from prior recordings, enhanced, cleaned up, and submitted as original untouched evidence. And when Isaac brought this to the attention of the prison's legal advocacy team, doors started creaking open, not out of justice, but curiosity, because suddenly Isaac wasn't just another prisoner. He was a man with a story that could unravel careers, and power hates uncertainty, especially when it's built on secrets. So when word got out that Isaac was building a case from inside, strange things started happening. His cell was tossed, his files went missing, and a fellow inmate, his closest ally, was found dead in the yard under unknown circumstances. It was a warning, one written in blood. But Isaac didn't stop. He doubled down, recorded every conversation he could, smuggled letters through trusted contacts, and reached out to a small-time documentary filmmaker who'd once covered corruption in the city's housing commission. Her name was Rhea Calloway. And when she heard Isaac's story, saw the receipts, the files, the timeline, it wasn't just compelling, it was explosive. She pitched the story to a few media outlets and got silence, then death threats, then her apartment broken into. But that only confirmed what Isaac already knew. This was bigger than anyone imagined. And as Rhea dug deeper, she uncovered something massive. A private prison investment scheme linked to several mob-connected politicians, one of whom sat on the parole board that denied Isaac his first appeal. The irony was brutal. He was locked in a system that profited from his conviction, with every incentive to keep him there. But now, they were the ones being watched. And Isaac? He started preparing not just to survive, but to return. Because when this house of cards came down, he wouldn't be crawling out of the rubble. He'd be standing on top of it, and justice wouldn't just be poetic, it would be televised. But the night before the first motion hearing, Rhea vanished. Her car found abandoned. At a gas station, her laptop missing, her phone wiped clean, and all that remained was a voicemail she left for Isaac's advocate team, just 3 words whispered in panic. "They found me." And as the audio cut off, Isaac sat in the prison library, the weight of truth pressing down on him like a second sentence, and he realized the war wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about exposing a system built to destroy people like him and erasing the evidence before anyone could fight back. And now they were erasing Rhea, which meant they were watching again, moving, tightening the net, and the next move would have to be perfect. One mistake could cost him everything. But if he got it right, he wouldn't just prove his innocence, he'd bring down the entire empire that framed him. They thought taking Rhea would be the final blow, the silencer to the only voice brave enough to echo Isaac's truth beyond the prison walls. But what they didn't know was that Rhea had planned for this. She knew they were coming. And days before she vanished, she mailed a backup drive to a lawyer she once trusted, a woman named Dana Coury, who'd walked away from the courtroom years ago when justice stopped making sense and money started speaking louder than facts. But when Dana opened the envelope and saw the files, the voice memos, the prison logs, and the forged court documents, all time-stamped, all pointing to a multi-million-dollar web of corruption linking the mob, private prisons, and elected officials, she didn't hesitate. She dusted off her license, filed an emergency motion, and within 48 hours, Isaac was granted a closed hearing, no cameras, no press, but inside that courtroom, the air cracked with tension because for the first time since his conviction, the truth had a fighting chance. And when Dana laid out the timeline, exposing how evidence had been falsified, how Frankie V's testimony had been engineered using voice cloning AI, how the lead detective on the case had taken an early retirement and disappeared to the Cayman Islands, the judge went pale. The DA scrambled for a recess, and Isaac, sitting silently in his jumpsuit, didn't smile. But his eyes burned with the weight of 10 years of buried rage finally catching flame. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because overturning a conviction doesn't erase a decade of damage, and it doesn't stop the people who still have everything to lose. So when the judge ordered a full inquiry into the original trial, Isaac was quietly moved into protective custody. Not for his safety, but so no one else could get to him before the truth hit the news. Because Dana, bold as ever, went public with the evidence on a live stream, naming names, showing files, connecting dots so clear even the deniers couldn't look away, and suddenly the internet exploded. Hashtags, articles, podcast specials dissecting every inch of Isaac's case, turning him from inmate to symbol, from felon to freedom fighter. But just as momentum built, Frankie V reappeared. Only this time, he wasn't reading a script. He was bleeding from the side, limping into a hospital in Ohio with a burner phone and a confession that lit the case on fire. He admitted he was paid off by a man named Carlo Tagliani, a mob enforcer turned political fixer, to fake his story in exchange for protection and cash. And now they were trying to silence him too. The hospital call was intercepted by an independent journalist who traced the phone to a safe house rented under an alias tied to a defunct passee supporting prison expansion. And suddenly, the story wasn't just about Isaac. It was about a nationwide system built to profit from people's pain. Isaac was released under witness protection while the federal investigation unraveled the empire that buried him. But he didn't go quiet. No. Isaac went viral. He sat in a dimly lit studio, eyes locked to the camera, and told the story from his soul, every betrayal, every lie, every moment he had to fight to hold on to the belief that the truth still mattered. And people listened. Millions. His message was more than just a recounting. It was a rallying cry. He called it killer mindset, a mindset forged in pain, sharpened in silence, and unleashed with purpose. But before the video ended, he paused, looked into the lens, and said, "You think this is the end? You think now that I'm free, they'll stop? This was never about just me. This was a machine, and it's still running. But now I know how to tear it down." The moment Isaac's message dropped, the internet shook. Millions watched, millions reposted, and yet, beneath the praise and viral noise, danger grew quieter, more precise, because now he wasn't just exposing a corrupt system. He was threatening those who still thrived in its shadows. And deep in the heart of Manhattan, a boardroom full of men in sharp suits and darker intentions watched the video on mute, their faces still, their silence louder than bullets, because they weren't just investors in prison infrastructure. They were architects of the narrative that shaped men like Isaac into monsters and sold it back to the public as justice. And now the monster was talking back, with facts, with names, with dates, and with proof that scared them more than any gun ever could. But Isaac, back in hiding with Dana and a small documentary team, was already 3 steps ahead. Because the next move wasn't just to expose the machine, it was to break it live, raw, in real time. And to do that, he needed someone on the inside who hadn't defected yet, someone still loyal to the mob, someone who owed him a favor, someone like Tony Blackjack Ferreira, the mob enforcer who once ran collections in Isaac's old neighborhood, the same man who stood by as Isaac got framed but never pulled the trigger, the same man who once whispered, "You don't deserve this," when the cuffs clicked and the world turned cold. So when Isaac called him from a burner and said, "You owe me," Tony didn't hang up. He just sighed and said, "I know." And 2 days later, he showed up at the safe house with blood on his shirt and fear in his eyes, because he'd just escaped a setup, one that was supposed to silence him before he could flip. And now the stakes weren't just legal or financial, they were fatal, because the mob wasn't hiding anymore. They were cleaning house, and anyone even rumored to be talking was on a list. But what Tony brought was more than just gossip. He had a flash drive, labeled Hunter, filled with surveillance footage, money drops, call logs, and, most damning of all, audio files of conversations between state officials and mob captains discussing campaign donations and quota incentives for privately owned prisons. And as Dana listened, her hands shook. Because this wasn't just enough to bring the house down. It was enough to light the fuse on a political explosion. And they had just lit the match. But right as the team prepared to upload the evidence to a secure public archive, the power cut out, their backup phones went dead, and the last thing they saw on the security monitor was a figure in a black coat approaching the front door, holding something small, metallic, and pulsing red. And in that split second, Isaac knew this wasn't just a raid. This was a message. And before anyone could speak, the screen went black. A loud crack echoed through the room, and everything shook. The explosion never came, because it wasn't a bomb. It was a decoy, a psychological warfare tactic meant to rattle them, to remind Isaac and Dana that even in the light of truth, the shadows could still reach them. But what the mob hadn't counted on was the backup plan, a hidden satellite uplink connected to Dana's encrypted server, which triggered the moment the main system went down, automatically uploading every shred of the Hunter files to an international watchdog network and 5 major news outlets across the globe. And within minutes, headlines erupted, the audio tapes playing on repeat across every platform, hashtags trending like wildfire. And suddenly, America wasn't just listening, they were demanding answers. And while federal agents swept in to secure Isaac and Dana, storming the building just seconds after the power cut, a massive, coordinated sting operation unfolded across 3 states, leading to the arrest of 17 officials, 4 former judges, and 2 of the most feared mob bosses still breathing, including Carlo Tagliani himself, who was caught trying to flee across the border disguised as a priest, clutching a forged passport and $3 million in crypto wallets sewn into his jacket lining. But the real justice came days later when Isaac walked freely into a packed courtroom. No chains, no cuffs, just a mic in front of him and a nation waiting to hear what he had to say. And he spoke not with vengeance, but with fire, telling his story to the faces of the very people who built their careers off his pain, the room dead silent except for the sound of truth, echoing louder than any gavel. And when the judge officially exonerated him, clearing his record in full, the applause didn't come from the back. It came from the officers lining the walls, from the court staff, from the people who realized they weren't just witnessing freedom. They were witnessing a revolution, and Isaac didn't stop there. He launched an initiative called Rebuild Mindset, dedicated to helping wrongly convicted inmates transition into life, to giving them platforms, tools, and voices to turn their pain into purpose. And his first speech as a free man, standing on a TEDx stage in a suit that didn't carry the scent of a cell, shook the world again when he looked into the camera and said, "They tried to bury me. They forgot I was a seed." And just as the crowd rose in thunderous applause, he turned slightly, smiled, and said, "But if you think this was the last story, you haven't been paying attention. This world is full of people they've tried to silence, and I'm just getting started. So, if you want to hear what they never wanted you to know, subscribe to Killer Mindset and join me for the next fight. Justice is only just beginning.